A multi-stakeholder formation under the auspice of the National Education Trust has developed a comprehensive blueprint that provides a roadmap to improve learners' reading has been unveiled. So the blueprint, which is known as the National Reading Plan, was developed by the National Reading Coalition, which is currently incubated in the National Education Collaboration Trust, a multi-stakeholder organization, which with a mission to enhance education outcome in the country. So I thought let's bring in the CEO of this important trust, the National Education Collaboration Trust. Mr. Godwin Khosa is joining us in the studio. Machironi, thank you so much for joining us. Ubuntu Radio.
Shall I say Mangwanani?
Yes.
Or Ekaro in Yoruba? These are part of our heritage in Africa.
Yes.
And upshade indeed.
Let's talk about, before we go into talk about this plan and what's happening in the education front and what role does the trust play, please locate the National Education Collaboration Trust within the education space.
So in many ways, the National Education Trust is an embodiment of the heritage that we have in South Africa. It's an organization that has been jointly set up by business, teacher unions, civil society, and government, with a primary aim of improving the quality of education by supporting government to pursue those goals that are outlined in the National Development Plan.
What has been your observation from the onset? South Africa, in terms of, we're talking about all the challenges when it comes to education, where the NECT is playing a role.
Yeah. So there are challenges in the education system, but we don't have the worst challenges as the country.
Yeah.
Unlike most of the headlines that we see, which suggest that we have useless teachers, uneducable kids, it's not that worse. And I think we need to use evidence to get to a reliable picture of where we are, and without actually burying our heads in the sand. So you'll know that from 1994 there's been an increase in the number of learners, young people who had access to education. So we're almost 100%. There are dropouts between the point at which kids start school and when they leave, they have to leave school. So that's being dealt with. But part of the challenges are that our kids aren't performing to the aspired level, and measured, in three, languages. Subjects: mathematics, science, and languages. So the National Development Plan recognizes those challenges and recognizes the challenges in those three subject areas. It thus outline a set of targets. For instance, the National Development Plan aspires that would have 450,000 learners produced from the education system who are pursuing maths and science and engineering, careers. We're still very far from meeting that number, right? But the target has been set, and the National Development Plan suggests what we should do in order to meet that target. So some of the things that the National Development Plan suggests we should do is that stakeholders must work together. It's that we have to have an active citizenry. So the NECT is a product of that mentality, that thinking, that we got to get South Africans together to work together to address very significant challenges in the system. We want to mobilize South Africans to improve reading levels amongst our young people and adults. So that's where the National Reading Improvement Plan comes.
Yeah, let's get into that plan. What is contained in the plan?
So what's contained in the plan, it's a whole lot of words, text, sentences, which actually cut across some vision of where we want to take South Africa to in terms of reading, some principles that would guide the process, the values that would underpin the entire process, as well as targets and activities and approaches that we would use to achieve that. So Anyway, in 2017, we get this report that confirms that majority of our kids can't read for meaning, right? So we start looking at what it is. And fortunately, I mean, we're blessed in South Africa with the quality of research that's undertaken by universities from Cape Town to Limpopo and so on. We looked at all that. And what that suggested was that actually there's lots of reading improvement initiatives that are being carried out by government as well as the non-governmental agencies, private sector, NGOs, and so on. But these aren't well coordinated.
Okay.
You know, people go into communities, they buy a book for a child, they teach a teacher on how to teach reading and so on and so forth. So fortunately and thankfully to his for his vision, the president spoke to about 300 education officials beginning of the year. And in his speech to encourage educationists to focus a little more on education, he said reading is one of the key challenges in the sector. And he said, we must actually start a reading revolution.
Okay.
Following that, by the 15th of February, working with Minister Mutshekga, the NECT and about 400 stakeholders were launching the National Reading Coalition.
Yeah.
So note the use of the words. Not a national reading program, but a national reading coalition. So getting South Africans again to work together to help address this big challenge.
You're not targeting. Let me come in there. You're not targeting only public institution, also the private institution as well.
So we are prioritizing public institutions
because
that's where the biggest challenge is.
Okay.
And we're not closing the door, out for private institutions. And in fact, I think most of the private institutions can partner with us in the public schools to share reading resources and in fact technical expertise to improve reading. We have to address the reading challenge from the classroom into the household, into the communities and so on.
What kind of conversation is happening within the organizations in the program that you are leading in terms of the use of our African languages?
Yeah. The link between the household and the school and the classroom, I must say, is very weak. So I can tell you that teachers teach reading on a daily basis, but most of our teachers have not been particularly taught on how to teach reading. And in most cases, we have, of course, some universities, don't have, grounded programs on how to teach reading, and don't even speak about how to teach reading in African languages. Because often, when they prepare teachers to teach reading, they teach them in English in order to go and teach. You know what I mean? So that's part of the weakness. But then the other parts of the weakness, as I go from the classroom to the household, is that you find that teachers themselves don't read.
That's a challenge.
Yeah. So if a teacher doesn't read, how are you going to promote reading to these young people? How are you going to impress the importance of reading to these young people? The same applies to, principals and whatever not and so on. So, Tali, even parents, very few of our African parents, South African parents read. And when your kids see you read, whether you're reading English or Afrikaans or Chivenda or Shangani.
That's the culture being cultivated.
Yeah, I mean, they start to appreciate the value of reading, right? So then we can draw that closer to, African languages and so on and so forth.
We broadcast in various missions across the world. Yeah. South Africa has got a footprint almost in every continent, actually in every continent as we speak right now. Are you benchmarking to say, I mean, compared to other countries, this is where South Africa is at, how other countries are actually improving their reading? Because I'm thinking this is just not a South African challenge that we are having, but it would be nice to see other countries, how have they been successful, how they've been doing it as well. Deliberately so to say we need to improve the reading in our own specific countries as well. I mean, the African continent will be one.
So that's an important, question. But I want to bring two perspectives to it because I don't believe that just stacking countries on a log, on a competition log, is the way to go. We gotta take a little more sophisticated, perspective to the comparison. So the first perspective I want to bring in is that reading has levels, right? The first level is you must be able to sound out, text.
Yeah.
So if you see some words and sentences, you must be able to decode that and sound out, that. So that's the first level. That should be taught in the classroom.
Okay.
Right? The second level is that when you're able to, kind of sound out those words, you must be able to extract meaning. If you're able to extract meaning, then you'll pass, you'll understand geography well, you'll understand the story, and so on. The third level, which is the most sophisticated level, is you got to be able to enjoy reading. You must read for fulfillment. You must read for pleasure. That's where you and I must be. That's where our kids must be. Every time they see a book, they must immediately develop a thirst to open the book and read and expand their. So if we're going to compare ourselves, it must be across those perspectives, right? The second perspective is that there is a value chain to improving reading. So, and that's the value chain that the National Reading Coalition is following. The first is, how many of our teachers have been prepared to teach reading in the universities? Right? Let's compare ourselves in that regard. The second one is, how many of the 433,000 teachers in the system know how to teach reading? The third one is, how many of our kids have access to age and language relevant reading material so that we build excitement? The fourth one is, to what extent are our communities supporting reading in the communities as well as in the schools? The fifth one is the appropriateness of our language policies at any point in time. Of course, the sixth one is, what research are we doing in as far as reading is concerned, and languages and literacy, and to what extent are we succeeding in driving an agenda that touches on all these 5 aspects of the reading coalition?
From your engagement with the stakeholders as well, what is where is the direction of the conversation going in terms of, you have mentioned in terms of they read to understand, there needs to be a reading where they just enjoy reading. The curiosity needs to be developed from an early age as well. In terms of the content, right? Because content is everything, right? Because I was talking to writers, scholars, even in my previous conversation, to say, what are those books? Who is writing those books? What is inside those books? Does it talk about South Africa right now? Is it history related? Is it life related? What? Excuse me. From that, what is the content? So is the content conversation happening?
So the content conversation is happening, and it's happening at various levels. One is the commercial dynamics around writing and the production and dissemination and the wealth and profits that are generated from that. We're still a long way. In fact, the South African Center for Book Development has done some research which suggests that most of the people who are in the commercial aspects of reading are the non-speakers of the language in which they produce. So there, we got to sort out those things. That's because if you don't sort it out, those who write these books from those languages don't get incentives. They paid peanuts out of that whole chain. So they're not incentivized to write more. And in fact, we have very little, insufficient provision of, books written in African languages. But from in other perspectives about content, a very exciting perspective is about the 4th industrial revolution. How every child and every young person or adult have a gadget and so on and so forth. So I mean, I've said before that we actually aren't married to the book itself, but we're married to the content. And in terms of the content, we have to strike a balance between your local and international, content. We're gonna have to strike a balance between your African and non-African, content with global citizens. But logic has it that we have to start from home and grow outward, into the globe as a whole.
Last question. The National Education Collaboration Trust, in terms of its footprint in provinces as well. As we conclude, talk to me about the work in the provinces. Is this provincial coordinated? How is it working out?
So I can see that the first thing you want me to say is that we're right in Limpopo. we've been in Vuani. When Vuani was burning, we're right there. We're working in Vembe, for instance. If you know Judge Raulinga,
I do.
He chairs the district steering committee that oversees the work that happens there. We've got district steering committees elsewhere, But all in all, we're in about 71% of the schools across the country.
Yeah.
And we've kind of got into those levels because we work closely with the Department of Basic Education.
All right.
And the idea is that we have to permeate the entire system into 100% of the schools, where we'll get business, labor, civil society, parents, and everybody, and these judges get involved in education. And we think that's how we'd actually take full advantage of this heritage that we have in our country.
Do we have the resources?
So on a daily basis, we go to people who have the resources and say, please, put in the resources, put in the resources. But let me say, resources aren't limited to money. Resources are limited to
Money
social...
is the enabler.
You know, authority, commitment, your time, encouragement, positive attitude.
That's a resource.
That's part of the resources that we're mobilizing to drive, this important work of education improvement. Yeah.
Mr. Khosa, let me thank you so much for your time.
It's my pleasure.
All right, that's the conversation with Mr. Godwin Khosa. He's the CEO of the National Education Collaboration Trust. You heard it. What are you doing yourself in your own spaces to improve the reading culture, especially for our young ones here in the country as well? It's quite significant. Speaking of the opportune time, as we're talking about also being it Heritage Month. That's how we conclude it right here on Ubuntu Radio, South Africa's Public Diplomacy in Action. Coming up next, Thelma Ngobeni with the Diplomat right here on Ubuntu Radio.